Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. We are right on time. 09:31. My name is Piet Kircher. I'm Ambassador of Design for All Europe. So that means I do not work strictly and solely in the area of cultural heritage, but I work in the area of applying design thinking and design methodology to all sorts of different fields, one of which is cultural heritage. But this morning is not about me, so I'm going to shut up. I'm going to ask the speakers to come here and to make their presentations as rapidly as possible without compromising the quality of the presentation, of course, because we have 6 presentations this morning and we have a space of 2 hours. And I really want to allow time also for you to intervene and to ask questions and to discuss and to raise points. Our issue this morning is the wider perspective, and I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how that issue is interpreted by the different speakers, and also how you react to the issue of wider perspective, what it means to you. But I'm not going to seed any ideas now. I've got plenty of ideas of my own, which I will probably gather during the discussion and put to you at different points. But I'm going to go straight into the list now. Unfortunately, our first speaker, Anna Maria Zaharayade, from the University of Architecture and Urbanism, the Ion Mincu University here in Romania, could not be with us, but she has sent her paper and is going to be presented with great courage, I think, by Hanna Derer, who already spoke yesterday afternoon. So thank you for leaping into the breach, Hanna. And Hanna has the unfortunate task that she has a long paper to present, and I've asked her to present it as quickly as possible. But you understand, as I do, that as it's not her own paper, it is a very difficult task to shorten somebody else's work. So I'm thanking you in advance, Hanna, for what you can do. Thank you.
Thank you.
You don't need a slide change.
No, because she didn't send images, she sent only these 4 papers. Dear colleagues, first of all, I have to tell you how much I regret that I was not able to attend this prestigious event, and I thank my colleague and friend Hanna Derer for presenting my paper. The idea I bring to your attention derives from and continues the topic we debated in November in Bucharest under the heading Heritage and Democracy as part of the European Forum of Cultural Heritage in Romania. As I am, to some extent, an outsider to the practice of heritage, I teach theory of architecture and I study modern and contemporary architecture, I was intrigued by the topic. I even felt certain discomfort with it. I tried to uncover the strange chemistry between the management of heritage as a democratic practice and the constant need to care for democracy itself. The two exist in our contemporary society under profound scrutiny and redefinitions that prove the complexities and difficulties of managing heritage in a democratic liberal society. In other words, the democratic values and instruments can serve a good and effective protection of heritage, but a democratic condition in itself cannot be taken for granted, and it requires permanent and alert attention. My contribution today refers to this permanent and necessary alert. The 2018 Daily Declaration speaks about heritage and democracy as key ingredients in a people-based approach to sustainable development, and acknowledges that heritage constitutes not only a fundamental human right, but also a key resource in enhancing quality of life and social cohesion. In the same regard, many other documents and recommendations include participation as a fundamental part of heritage management and encourage to the relocation of the human being and not concrete objects or abstract values at the center of the production of heritage. And this is a humanist approach to be welcomed and put into practice. However, to really become people-based, to enhance the quality of life and social cohesion through heritage, to make people gather around common actions concerning heritage preservation turns out to be never so obvious or nor so easy to achieve. In many places, not only in Romania. From my international experience, I dare say that what is specific to Romania is not the nature of problems, but their degree of gravity. The deeper democratization, which circumscribes the principles above, is also problematic in other realms of culture. For instance, it is also interrogated in the management of museums, especially the contemporary art museums, from which the debate started. It was metaphorically summarized in the question, to whom belongs the collection? Or how to mediate between the high art preserved in museums and the universalized right of people to feel represented by what is deemed as mobile heritage. Their problem may be easier to solve, or at least to bypass, as far as a collection could continue its life even if not appropriated by a larger audience. But this is not the case for the built heritage, where the metaphorical question, to whom belonged the built heritage, becomes critical simply because its transmission from a generation to another cannot be properly secured without people's consent or cooperation, and the preservation is based on a set of measures that automatically mean certain limitations of their individual freedoms or rights. At issue here is how to convince the large public, or at least a majority, to adopt the built heritage and to recognize it as a shared value that represents them and enhances the quality of their lives, a value to be respected and cherished despite the restrictive rules inflicted upon their freedom. The problem can be handled, and it is handled at many levels, legal, administrative, architectural, and it's not my intention to tackle this complex issue. I only want to bring to your attention a recent phenomenon that could have an unexpected knock-on effect on the expected change of paradigm, which places the human being, not the object, at the center of management preservation. I refer to the gradual rise of architects' interest in informality. This is a relatively recent professional affinity, which increasingly turns into fascination, and I think that it should be discussed since it could have an impact on the principle of a people-based approach in conservation as well. Grown from survival strategies in face of neoliberal or totalitarian modes of production of space, informality can be seen as a form of contemporary urban vernacular, and what can we learn from people's constructive behavior can definitely be helpful to find ways to compensate the architectural excess of the last century. To give you an academic example, 4 out of 5 doctoral students I tutored in the last 3 years were absolutely mesmerized by the topic of informality in architecture or in the city, as if this were the future of architecture. But I have plenty other examples, and not just in Romania. Certainly, it seems to be growing into a search for other aesthetic expressions and other modes of architectural production. All these fields are to be explored. In recent architectural theories, this approach is seen as an expansion of the profession outside its traditional limits, or another way of doing architecture, one that eschews the traditional image of the architect as designer of buildings, replacing it with an idea of architect as agent, acting and collaborating with and on behalf of others. A sort of contemporary version of the barefoot architects, immersed in a contested metropolitan landscapes. And here there are several examples I will skip. Okay. I have also to listen to the translators. It seems that heritage and its preservation are not targeted by these approaches because heritage is officially recognized as fundamental human value. In fact, it is precisely the opposite, because the value called heritage is institutionalized and transformed into heritage lists and rules, regulations, as the result of specialized knowledge, attentive reflections, and thorough analysis, which are, in fact, contested by this approach regarding informality. Generally, I'm not a conservative, and far from me to reject the interest of these searches and research fields. I do admire the work of the forefathers mentioned before, that I skipped so elegantly. Their professional ideas are certainly valuable for drawing the attention on still unsearched aspects of our life, which did not enter the professional concern until recently, and also for focusing on the necessary social and political involvement of architects. Yet, I worry about overrating them, as in many professional publications where they are highly credited for being critically towards the extant architectural knowledge and for being highly democratic. And here begin my doubts. I give a simple example. Some more radical studies call for, and she quotes, a keeping at distance approach to architecture and design, while others call for experts not to dominate community decision-making processes and instead to simply listen to the desires and aspirations of the people. But this does challenge the essence of the professional knowledge and, more dangerously in my opinion, relativizes the role of the professional expertise in general, including the heritage expertise in particular. Or can the specialist in heritage restoration preservation be a barefoot architect, otherwise a manifestation largely supported by the Royal Institute of British Architects? Can he or she be only an agent acting on the behalf of the others as far as he or she must respect the constraints required by the monument? And even more paradoxically, acting on behalf of the others when the others contest the professional expertise. The problem is not only professional, it's wider, since the approaches meet a more general contestant state of mind. It regards the public, this public who, theoretically, benefits from heritage as cultural value and key factor in enhancing its quality of life, but who contest its rules. Similarly, the unconditional fascination of students, the future architects, is disquieting, as it is fundamentally uncritical and seems underlain by a protean sort of revolt against the established rules in general, be they professional, economic, or social. This does challenge our present democratic rules, or maybe our existing democratic habits, on which the acknowledgement of heritage and its management are still based, because they are rather a form of democratic anarchy. Whether I or we like it or not, it is in the air. We can detect this latent and amorphous spirit of revolt against professionalism, labeled elitism, everywhere, from social media to the Gilets jaunes protest. My point is that whatever motivates the new attitude, and no matter how democratic it really is, this vivid interest of the young generations of architects in a truce of popular and frequently illegal constructive behavior, as opposed to the erudite knowledge, makes much more difficult the common acceptance of the rigors of preservation, which must be professionally based. I may be old school, but for me, the problem stays in education, where we have to search for la juste mesure, the right measure between vernacular creativity and informality with their freedom and simplicity, and the specialized erudite professionalism with its restrictive rules and complex knowledge. For me, this is the path to allow in order to prevent the democratic excess or even deviation. This is not simple either. Hannah Dera drew yesterday the ideal portraits, the lineamenta, as Alberti would say, of the architect and of the specialist in restoration. I confess that I'm not able to trace the portrait of the professor who has to find a way to teach the future architect about the importance of a solid architectural culture based on tradition and certain conventions, while this very tradition is diffusely contested. Of a professor who has to find the right proportion between the thoroughness of the culture who made us architects and its relativization, floating in the air, real or virtual, that the young generation breathes. And although this topic may seem far away from heritage management, the announced and necessary change of paradigm must take this contradictory aspect into consideration as to fit Hannah Dera's portrait of an ideal architect who considers heritage as being his, her, and is able to cope with the heritage issues and with people in general as well. Thank you very much.
Hannah, thank you so much for actually fitting into the 10-minute time slot. This was an amazing feat, considering you were reading somebody else's presentation.
I hope you still could understand.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I think you probably join in me in the regret that we cannot have Anna Maria here with us to ask questions, because there are many questions that are posed by this paper. And it is a pity that she can't answer the questions. But now, maybe some of the questions that are milling around in our heads will be factored into the presentations that will be made by the following speakers as well, because I think this is likely to happen during the course of the morning. So I'll now give the floor to you, Tere Nupan from Norway, and you will enlighten us with yours. With your presentation. You have the slide changer.
You bring up my slide.
And you also have a mic of your own here.
Okay. I only have 2 hands, and I have 3 things, plus my glasses. Yeah. Okay.
I always complain about this when I'm in the buffet. I tell my mother, you didn't make me right. I need 3 hands. You know, one for the plate, one for the glass, and one for the fork. We got it all wrong. So, you're feeling the same thing now, Tere.
How does this work? How does it work? One forward. Where am I supposed to point it? There. Oh, go. Yeah. Just a second. Yeah. Maybe you have to turn it on. Huh? The third hand. Yeah. No, come on. Just I know where. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. And now I just press. Yeah, okay. So I will tackle this problem from a different angle, and I'm more into macro politics than I'm into architecture. I work designing, that's a presumptive word, designing cultural heritage policies, yeah? But that's basically what I try to do. Oh, yes, okay. So the wider perspective, if we look back at what has happened the last 10 years, 15 maybe, we see that we are getting a new kind of instrumentalization. If you take a picture, wait a little bit, because there are more lines coming on the, okay. So the focus now is on the use of the object. And ideally, how can the object generate income? So it is an asset. It can be an asset. Of course, most people speak about cultural heritage as though it was a liability. It's something that costs money, but now we think of it as something that can generate money. Now, what we need in this new situation is measurement and monitoring and statistics. Quite far away from the traditional humanistic approach to cultural heritage. And we have decided, or at least the Council of Ministers of the European Union have decided, that cultural heritage is a cross-sector thing. It touches transport, it touches tourism, it touches building regulations, etc. And it's integrated in all those things. I mean, if it had not been for the cultural heritage, what would tourism be? Only beaches and sun. But even the beach and sun-seeking people, they go and visit the old town, etc. You know, so it means that actually considering cultural heritage is something all different sectors of politics should do. And we have done this for 15 years in Norway, so it's not new for us. But the reason why we have done it is because we are part of the environmental ministry. And the environmental thing says the polluter pays, or the polluter has a sector responsibility. So it was easy for us to get it into the administration. It's not so easy to follow it up. And that's probably the most provocative thing is now cultural heritage has become a means of production in the Marxist sense. I'm not condoning the rest of Marx, but it's a means of production that means we can use it to generate income. It produces a good in the sense that you can buy and sell it. I just have a short time. Can you please tell me when I've done my first 5 minutes? Okay. Yeah. So I just want to pick out a couple of things: the socio-economic value of the tangible heritage and EU legislation, how it affects the cultural heritage sector. So I will not touch this. The EU legislation, we will come back to it, affects us. The things on the agenda today is we cannot use nitrogen anymore, and we use it for biological pest control, to empty the air from oxygen, so all the pests die. Okay? It's a biological thing, but we have a problem with the EU regulations. Similarly, we have had a problem with wood tar, which is important for the Nordic countries. We have problems with construction projects and building regulations and paints, just to mention a few. We have 32 directives which we find problematic. Now, EU instruments can contribute. It's very interesting, you know, that we get more, there are more big ears in Brussels supporting cultural heritage than there basically is at the national level. It's a very interesting thing. I'm just observing it. I have no explanation for it. And the reporting obligations, you know, before you got the money and the architect did as the architect does, and there was not much control. There was not much inspection. There was not much reporting. How many jobs does this thing create? What are you going to use it for? What will be its value for the local society, etc.? No. Nobody cares about that. Cared about it. Now we are starting to ask these results from heritage projects too. Yes, and then finally we have a problem with the reduction in cultural heritage staff in institutions. Not only a problem with the reduction, but also a problem with the professions involved. We're still traditionally staffed. Architects, engineers. Okay, how about the sociologists? How about the economists? How about the people dialoguing with the local communities? All these professions have a place, but instead we get cut off one head at a time. And that while the obligations that are coming to us from the politicians increase. They want us to create miracles with cultural heritage.
You've done your 5 minutes, so you have another 5.
Good. I think I can almost manage. Okay. Okay, just some socioeconomic figures that we have calculated. We are working with the European Union to do a recalculation of this thing. So in Norway, there are 5 million people. Okay, 5.5 million people. So the construction works related to historic buildings and cultural heritage create 9,600 jobs in 2,600 small and medium enterprises, okay? And from tourism, we create 15,000, 16,000 jobs. So it's 1.1% of the employment. Sounds like a small figure, but if you look at the statistics for the different business sectors, like chemicals, etc., they're not doing more than 2-3% of the employment. And the car industry, well, most of it has moved to China, but it's not doing so much better anyway. And the gross value, of course, you all know what the difference between the brut national product is and the gross value added. It means what is really left. So if I sell a souvenir here and I ask you for 10 lei, the question is how much did I pay for the product, and did it come from China or did it come from Romania? So it's the net value of the increase of selling the product. Just to be. So we're doing 2% of the BNP and 0.8% of the gross value added, which is a surprisingly large figure, even though they seem small. The mic. Okay. Okay. I thought my voice was loud enough to be able to. Okay. Right. I just brought some figures from England. I'm not talking about the UK. I'm talking about England. And you see the headline finding is that they do 2% of the national GVA, and it's 11.9 billion pounds. Okay. The rest of the figures, you can see the presentations will be available afterwards. Now, integrated project management. I have 3 more slides. So traditionally, we are talking about the object, the cultural heritage thing, and we fix it. That's the output of our project. And then it's being used. It's also output. The point with the integrated projects is that we take the whole project development line and manage it as one. Not a revolutionary idea, but it's timely in our sector. But what happens now, or what is happening now, is that the object becomes an input to something else. Now, the focus is on the business plan, the use. The object is secondary. That doesn't mean that taking care of it is secondary, but it just means that in the way of thinking, it's a means to something else. Tourism, accommodation, museums, hotels, employment, etc., etc. Okay? Now, the final 2 slides. I was thinking, how could I shortly illustrate how the European Union, which makes 90% of the European laws presently, national governments are hardly active in this sector. How does this affect the care of cultural heritage? So we have the heritage, the object or the site. We have some funding criteria. We have project management. And we have, of course, rules for purchasing and tendering, which we have to follow, the rules are for everybody. So then we decide we're going to do a project. We're going to fix something or make something earn more money. Good. Then we have to take care of the heritage regulations, first of all. But we have to have a use plan. What is the point of fixing this building, of using a couple of millions? What does it give at the end? And then we are faced with the technical regulations, the building regulations. How do you handle the building from 1700 when you are faced with building regulations from 2004, made for modern buildings? Yes, I know, it's a headache. Yeah, okay. So, and then we have product legislation. If I'm just going to buy an old window, I'm not allowed to do it. I'm not allowed to take an old window out of one building and put it in another building without having a declaration of performance for the window. My God, we don't even know what it is. And nobody is willing to tell us for the moment what it is and how we do it. Conservation works, okay, there are certain rules for conservation works. It can be summed up, change as little as possible and keep as much as possible. And then we have the CEN standards, the European standards, where we have about 30 operative standards now for cultural heritage, and they should be used as a security for quality management. Now, you see, all this stuff is affected by EU regulations. You cannot use any building for anything. You want to put a kitchen into an old building and serve food to the tourists? Okay. The food control authorities are coming and say, no, 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 can't do that. You don't have a washing machine. This is unhygienic. Anything. And the project, if it wants money, has to do reporting. The technical regulations are affected by the EU. There are rules for purchasing and tendering, and et cetera, et cetera. So no way out. We have to abide by these rules, and it's creating a new field of work for the heritage authorities or for the municipal people involved in heritage. But it's not bringing any more capacity or people to do the job. So we are kind of swimming in an ocean full of plastic. Only that the difference now is that the ocean is not full of plastic, the ocean is full of EU regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Tere. The ocean is full of EU regulations. It's probably easier to get rid of some of those than it is to get rid of the plastic in the ocean, but anyway. No comment. No, we can go on to that in the discussion phase. The next speaker on our list this morning is Sherban Tiganash. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Doesn't matter. Well, then correct me, please. You have the speaker, you have the microphone, and you have the...
Oh, I can have it. I don't use it.
You don't use it. Okay.
And I have no presentation, which I'll make probably happier by that. Yeah. I started to write some lines for this meeting, for this debate, I hope, 3 times up to now. First time I realized that all my sentences related to conservation, heritage conservation in Romania started with the word failure. So I quit this direction, then I restructured everything, and I started to think about what happened in my 30 years career as an architect in this country related to heritage. I filled some pages. Actually, I have to tell you very honestly, I'm not entitled to touch listed building. I don't have the rights to restore or to touch it or to work in heritage. I'm not qualified. I can only talk. And I did it for the last 10 years massively. Okay, I quit also this second attempt to prepare something for this meeting. And I've concentrated and adapted, because architects should adapt to the situation, to the time situation, to the environment situation, to the public maybe. So I took just 3 or 4 lines which I want to share with you. First is that one of the most interesting things which happened in my last 10 years is that I started to study the profession of architect in Romania in many ways. Actually, my first study, which was done with sociologists and statisticians, experts in such research, was done in 2010 and was called Architect in Romania, a study of a profession. It was the first time ever we tried this in this country. Following to that, I continued to generate, from the position of chairman of the Order of Architects, different studies related to the profession, because we've realized that knowing us is absolutely important to know how to continue and what is our relevance. Of course, also related to the field we are talking today here. So I studied the market with some qualified teams several times. We studied the beginning of the profession, the starting generation, the interns. We studied the way they can find jobs and what actually is requested in the field of practicing architecture, and many other things. of course, you have to keep studying because the world is very dynamic and the profession is very dynamic and the professional field is very dynamic. And we know a lot of things about this. And we learned a lot of things about the perception, the self-perception of the profession, the perception of the profession from outside in, and the perception of heritage in both cases, which is really interesting, and I would like to debate with you if the case. The second very interesting, in my opinion, field I'm dedicated right now is the future role of architect. And I'm happy that Anna Maria Zahariade mentioned very interestingly in the first presentation, presented by Hannah, very interesting lines about this. What actually I'm involved in now, because with some partners we are organizing in 10 countries in Central and Eastern Europe, 10 countries up to now, different architectural conferences in the last 5 years. We took interviews to all our guests and speakers about the future role of the architect, and not only. So we managed now to organize more than 100 interviews and manifestos about the future, and we are trying to see how this profession is going, or is considering itself to be organized in the future. And I guarantee it's really interesting. I will happily share with you the conclusions after we publish our report. And the last one, which is going to happen quite soon, because in my new position of Secretary General of the International Union of Architects, we decided to organize a forum, a midterm forum as we called it, because we are organizing cycles of 3 years at the International Union of Architects. And this forum is going to happen this June, beginning of June in Baku, Azerbaijan. It's going to be hosted there. And the topic is mass tourism in historical cities, or over-tourism, which is a phenomenon which is quite recent and which is really affecting you know, major cities, major historical cities, you name them, Barcelona, Palma de Mallorca, or Venice, or whatever, Paris, or even smaller cities in countries like Norway, for example, when big cruisers are coming and tripling the population of a historical site in minutes, and what's happening there. So I think it's a really interesting topic, and I will really like to debate with you if necessary. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I think this is an invitation to our discussion afterwards, because there's some really interesting material that's going to come out of that. And I remind you, what we're doing here is we're putting the discussions yesterday and elsewhere in this conference into the broader perspective, into the wider perspective of what is happening in the world. And we're beginning to get some ideas about this. We're beginning to hear some input about legislative restrictions, the real world of economics, and now also the real world of where is architecture going, according to the architects themselves, and the rest of us. What do we think about that? That's going to be material for discussion, I think, when we get on to that phase. And thanks also for being limited in time, and yet managing to do an interesting input. The next speaker, Barry Gamble, is listed simply as World Heritage Expert. So no organization in the background there, Barry. You're a World Heritage Expert, and that is a pretty good sign-off to start with. You have the floor.
The first thing I always say is I'm no expert. Good morning, everyone. Barry Gamble from the UK. I've been independently consulting in World Heritage for almost 25 years. I'm giving you a short case study this morning from one of the nominations I was responsible for over 10 years ago now. But I'm a strong advocate for the World Heritage process as a driver of quality if the guidance under the auspices of UNESCO and ICOMOS for cultural sites is used diligently with the right resource. So my case study is going to be very brief. 10 minutes I'm going to be speaking for, and obviously we'll deal with any questions when we come to that debating session a little later. This was the nomination, my first nomination, inscribed in 2006 in Vilnius. The current director of the World Heritage Site, World Heritage Centre, Mechthild Rossler, handing this certificate over to our very own Prince Charles. This is the World Heritage Site. A lot of what we were talking about yesterday morning, funnily enough, some of the terms being used like inclusiveness, community, integrated approaches and so on. Funnily enough, when I looked back at my presentation, I used these words also. We all use them. We use them in different senses depending on the case in point. This is the World Heritage Site. Very relevant what we were talking about yesterday in terms of our approach. We have 81,000 residents within the World Heritage Site. It's a cultural landscape. It was the first industrial cultural landscape put forward as a serial nomination. Covers nearly 20,000 hectares across 2 counties, and 83% is in private ownership. So the need for an integrated approach is absolutely essential. Interestingly, the documentation, the nomination document, was the first document in the history of our Cornwall Council to be passed unanimously with no objections. I took this word from the conference documentation sent to me whilst I was traveling. I've been traveling for nearly 8 weeks. This transversal approach. It's jargon, I know, but putting a nomination document together for me, and I deal with between 1 and 2 each year at present, it's about rendering place-based complexity manageable, whilst taking into consideration all these views from the professional to the local interested resident. However, particularly important for me, whilst remaining result-oriented, because these things, of course, we have to be responsible for the investments, often significant investments, made by the country or the place concerned. Our integrated approach in this context, these are the responsibilities under the World Heritage Convention: identification, protection, conservation, presentation, and transmission. And all the things we've been talking about, and the heritage as a product very much comes into all this thinking. That's our structure, quite a standard structure, from the World Heritage Committee at the top through to our state party, and in this case the UK Government Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. We have a partnership board which was originally a stakeholder partnership representing 70 organisations. Consultation with the community was down to what we call a parish council level, which was the lowest administrative level that we could consult on. And we have a lot of partners, the National Trust and so on. That's our current iteration of the management plan. A new one's coming out this year, which outlines the management issues, the collective policies adopted by all the partnership board, and sets of strategic actions. We have a new set of strategic actions every 5 years, which we're responsible for reporting on. So going through the quality aspect, this is the identification. This is a very a standard approach that I've used in many nomination documents, very much a geographical approach, but that can bring quality control with it, as long as the tools are used diligently. So I've just taken through their various techniques, bearing in mind a lot of this work was done in the early 2000s, so we have moved on significantly since then. But mapping the World Heritage Site values, the so-called attributes, and producing an inventory of the evidence base, because obviously the World Heritage Convention is place-based. We have to not just convey this story of significance, but we must assemble the evidence base. So we used a variety of standard techniques, historical, cartographical analysis, correlating that with field investigation, all sorts of photography, and we documented everything on GIS, which was a great tool for me at the time. But to render this place-based complexity manageable, I used historic landscape characterization as a rapid tool to start to be able to draw and justify these boundaries. Historic landscape characterization, I still use the principles of it. It was developed in Cornwall in the mid-90s, and I was fortunate to have one of the pioneers of its development working on my team at the time. Very simple, straightforward way of rapidly characterizing the landscape for a cultural landscape bid. Protection and conservation, the very much supporting and facilitating regeneration. This is the motivation for many World Heritage nominations politically, integrating the need and particularly respecting the wishes of the community. There's some capital projects. I did a presentation. The World Heritage Site was 10 years old in 2016, and I did a presentation in Brussels. And I remember introducing the presentation with the basic statement of outstanding universal value. That was formerly the statement of significance. And nobody was really paying attention at all. There were DGs from all the European, the different departments. And as soon as I flashed up some spreadsheets, everybody looked up and could see how well we were doing from Europe at the time. There's nearly 70,000 projects levered in through that World Heritage status. After 10 years, we'd levered in £100 million of funding, much of it from a variety of EU strands. And all our projects are looking holistically at the range and the diversity of potential EU funding strands. There's an example of one project. It was about £35 million. It was absolutely a project for the community. It was a wasteland. There was a little island of protected historic buildings, but the rest of many hectares around it had been sterilized of any archaeological value, and it was put to the community, what do you want? And the community came up with, we ran workshops and so on. We had a responsibility for the heritage, and that was my role within the project to take care of that central island of heritage. But then it was over to the community as to what they wanted, and we put that within the framework of the World Heritage Convention, and with the various guidelines, the very good guidelines that are available in terms of interpreting the site, the Ecological Charter, for example, and many other guidances. We built sustainably, and we delivered the community a resource which attracted 250,000 visitors the first year. And the good thing is it's free. There's no entrance fee. There's all the data on sustainability and so on. Presentation, we took over Paddington Station for 18 months, free of charge. Transmission, education, and outreach. We've partnered with a lot of the usual range of institutions. Cultural events program, because I've only got a minute left, I'm going to show you very briefly how we are making the intangible, particularly the intangible heritage, relevant to the community. Again, very much guided by the community. We have lots of events running, community outreach, and this is the one that we did after our 10 years. We spent €300,000, and we built the biggest puppet ever built in the UK, and it walked the World Heritage Site. We attracted 126,000 of the local community. We had global TV coverage at the time, equivalent 22 million website hits, and it was voted the UK's best art project. But it was about engaging with the community and the range of audiences. That's my 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you also for finally bringing up the elephant in the room, intangible. It's the first time that we've heard the word intangible mentioned this morning, and I think we were discussing this over breakfast as well earlier on. We need to raise this issue every time to remind ourselves that we're also talking about the intangible. And it seems that if we don't, we fall into a sort of default mode where everything seems to be assumed to be related to the built environment, which of course it is, but if we don't remind ourselves about the importance of mentioning intangible every time as well, then the bigger world out there, in other words, the wider context, is not going to understand that we're also talking about intangible. So it's really, really important for us to filter that in every time we speak, every time we take the floor, every time we talk about cultural heritage. The next speaker on my list is Mihai Turche from the Mihai Eminescu Trust here in Romania. Mihai, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm very proud to be here today as a speaker. I'm a citizen of Sighișoara, and I am a practitioner of community development through cultural heritage revitalization. I will talk about our work today as a case study. It's a continuous work we are doing since 19 years. And it's a work which gives us satisfaction. We are working mainly in our communities, as we like to call them. Who is Mihai Eminescu Trust? We are an NGO, a small NGO, who tries to build a bridge, a connection, an emotional connection between the local communities and their remarkable heritage. Our mission is to revitalize and develop the local communities through this rich cultural and natural heritage. And we are proud that local communities are working with us. We celebrate this year 19 years of activity. We have implemented more than 1,200 projects and actions. And when I mean this project and action, I refer also to very small projects with a budget of 300 euros, and also large projects with over 1.5 million euros. We work in 47 villages and towns, but we have also about until now 115 communities where we have implemented a reforestation program. Our investment through the project is more than 10.5 million euros over these 19 years. Maybe it's too much, maybe it's not too much. For us, it's an important sum, which is reflected in the results we have achieved in these communities. Our philosophy and the main idea which we follow when we develop the projects is to plan and develop these projects together with, and for the community. Sorry. Oh. Pardon. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. I will challenge you now and ask you, how wide is the wider perspective? All of you have mentioned some keywords, and I add some other keywords, and probably all of you have other keywords which can be added to this wider perspective. I will mention some of our keywords which we have capitalized during our work. And of course, we have heritage as a central point, but around it we talk about ownership and responsibility, about innovation, authenticity, about equity, about nature, landscape, and not last, sustainability. How we reach, how we have put all these keywords into the wider perspective. Matt has built a concept which we call the whole village concept. And this concept, I have to tell you, was developed very progressively. We started very small, and we continuously adapted this concept. And this concept aims to revitalize and develop local communities sustainably by preserving and valuing their cultural and natural heritage, as well as to support these communities to become self-sufficient. The estimated impact of this concept is that we improve quality of life for every citizen, for every inhabitant of the community. We try to make them responsible and consider their heritage as their own. We try to make them understand how the mechanism of project development functions, because everyone knows this is not very easy. And we create more local jobs. These local jobs are very important for the communities. Who are the actors we are working with? I have to tell you, we are a small team. We are 6 persons, including our president, Caroline Vernoland. We are specialists, but we are practitioners. We are working with the members of the community. I pointed out the children and youth separately because they are the future for our projects, for our results, to develop them. We work with authorities, with entrepreneurs, with companies, with financial supporters, researchers, with other civil society organizations. And our role in this context is to build a bridge between all these actors and facilitate also communication, because sometimes we have to translate what authorities mean in their legal documents for the local communities. Also to translate what financial support expect from us through the project implementation and how locals can be involved and participate in the project. This is not very easy. Also, the actors change every time. It depends on the action, on the project we have we implement. Sometimes we work more with the locals, sometimes more with the authorities. But we try to keep this balance between these actors and try to involve them at every stage of our project implementation. I think to reach the wider perspective, we all agree that it needs an integrated, disciplinary and approach, and we are trying to do that. And it's not easy. Everyone knows. For us as an NGO, it's, I think, a privilege that we can adapt and be very flexible about the implementation. But in all our work, we try to integrate more than one field. We always implement a restoration project together with, we combine it with community development, with environmental protection or sustainable development. We involve craftsmen. We develop cultural and responsible tourism. Sorry. We started our work with the small facade restoration. When I'm talking about the cultural heritage, I include tangible, intangible, public and private heritage, listed and not enlisted, because it's very important to take care also about those buildings who have a value for the community, and not only because they are listed in an official document, and for which funding is not too easy to be, it's not accessible. So private owners have almost no possibility to restore this from other money, at least here in Romania. So facades was the beginning. We started to think about sustainability. How can we maintain these facades for a longer term, not to be destroyed? So we started to train locals, to learn, to remember the craftsmanship they at some point knew. And this kind of involvement is, in our perception, the most sustainable aspect we can give to restoration projects. Also, the new use for a building. We are always talking and debating with the local community how we can give and use this building after restoration work. The empower of local community is not an issue. The local community is another panel here, but I will point that the empowerment should not be made only in the direction of cultural heritage preservation, revitalization, but also to empower local communities to have a common voice and a strong voice, and be involved and participate in the decision-making process. And also an idea, and I think communities should be focused around a common goal, and I would say it's the common well-being. By achieving a common well-being, the communities are more responsible for everything that is around their community. We have the buildings, we have the people, and now I'm talking about the landscape, the environment around us. Agriculture. We shouldn't be afraid to make a connection between cultural heritage and agriculture, because the traditional agricultural practices were those who shaped the landscape around the villages. And professions like the shepherds and the beekeepers are very important also for the future of these landscapes. That's why we support the development, sustainable development of agriculture, of small-scale agriculture. We are also involved in reforestation program, and of course, wildlife and flora and fauna are very important for the landscape around the villages, around the heritage. The support for farmers and craftsmen and the promotion of local products is also very important. What we are doing, and which is very important for these small farmers, for the craftsmen, is to include in our projects their products. We use handmade bricks and tiles. We use hinges and doorknobs made by the blacksmith, or knitted or woven fabrics for different projects. And not least, we include the local gastronomy, the local products, the products of the small farmers. Honey, cheese, and milk and meat products, also juice. And we use all these products in the restoration projects, but also in developing tourism. Not a mass tourism, because this is what we are afraid of, and it starts also in our villages to become a problem. But a responsible tourism, and a tourism which is not the main activity for the locals. Our idea is to include tourism as a second activity for locals. Locals should maintain their agriculture activity, their everyday, their traditional lifestyle, and have tourism as a second option for their income. We follow 6 principles when we reach this wider perspective. We select together with the locals our projects, and we address real needs. We inform and involve the local authorities. We implement the projects together with the community. We apply the local know-how, the traditional practices and techniques. We empower locals to take over responsibility for project results. And not last, our projects are progressive and continuous. I think this progressive issue is very important because sometimes local communities are not prepared for very big projects. We have some pilot projects and multiplication references, which I want to share with you, to show also how diverse this wider perspective of MET is. We have built the first ecological wastewater purification system in Romania. It is in Viscri. We have given a new function to a fortified church in Almavi through a project supported by the EEA grants, the Center for Interpretation of Traditional Culture, which you will visit tomorrow. The art and craft summer camps are also very important for the younger generation to involve them in cultural heritage activities. The cultural root, Mullencraft, multi-ethnic living heritage, highlights the diversity we have here in these small communities. We have the village council in Viscri, which is an example which we want to replicate in other villages. This council is an informal council, but all groups, natural groups of the community are represented in this council. And this council meets regularly, once a month, and they discuss problems or future ideas for their community. The Saxon Greenway, which generated another interesting project, the horse and cart taxi in Viscri. People are they should leave the car outside the village, not to annoy the G's and the hens on the street, also the inhabitants, to leave their cars outside the village and take a horse and cart taxi. And not last, the strategic action plans for the Transylvanian villages, which we elaborated with the local communities, and we only facilitated their interaction. We have here some numbers, results of our wider perspective. You see 400 locals trained, 100 farmers and craftsmen supported, 7 community associations, 5 editions of the summer camps, 8,000 volunteers involved in cultural and natural heritage projects, more than 2 million trees planted, 7 historical buildings rehabilitated, and 10 whole village communities we are working at. Our projects are not only numbers, they generate also pride, happiness, and ownership. And this is what motivates me and my team to go on with our work. Thank you.
I think you agree with me, it was worth allowing Michaela the few extra minutes. That was some project you've just presented to us. I'm very impressed, and I think other people are as well, and there will probably be quite a lot of questions. That so many right things were included in this presentation. The last presentation this morning, and then we get on to the moment that you've all been waiting for when you can intervene as well and ask questions to the speakers. Glafkas Konstantinidis from Cyprus. Glafkas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Pete.
Do you need the...
I think so,
there you
yes.
go, there you go.
His way up.
Oh, don't
Good
ask
morning,
me.
good morning, good morning, good morning. Or good afternoon, depends what kind of watch you're carrying. I have to be honest with you, I have a problem with the characterization, wider perspective. We mustn't fall into this trap. It's a trap. Wider with respect to what? With reference to what? In the work that I do, I consider myself working in areas where core issues are developed and used. I think what I have to say to you are central to cultural heritage, but you will be the best judge of that. I am from Cyprus. I am an economist and an urban planner, and I do most of my work in the area of urban planning, Irene, urban planning, and also the overlap between the economy and heritage, particularly urban regeneration. Let me say very quickly that all societies derive from history. But the question is, how relevant is history to what we are trying to achieve today? And most of my economist friends, I think they limit themselves, they limit the role of their contribution to concentrating on heritage as a driver in economic development. I mean, this is really worn out now. In my work, I reverse the question and I say, how can the economy be a driver to contribute and create quality? Basically, this is the theme of my presentation because economists have a major role to play in justifying increased investment in cultural heritage as a means of ensuring quality. Where is quality coming from? It doesn't fall from the sky. You have to invest in quality. Now, investment means justifying. Basically, what I want to do, I want to do 3 things today, if I have the time, and I think I will have the time. One is to just simply refer to 3 important concepts. Without them, we have no glasses, no spectacles, we are blind. The second, I want to show to you some very important case studies that illustrate the meaning and the applicability of these important tools. And the third thing I want to do is that I hopefully and ambitiously I want to open the debate on what kinds of tools we need to enable the economy to contribute to quality. These are very key concepts. One is the cost of inaction. Costs don't go away, increase all the time. And as the Americans say, pardon the expression, they come up and they bite you in the ass. They don't go away. Economic value. Now, we heard about value, spiritual value, educational value, the value of heritage in a very abstract language. I respect that. There is cultural value inherent to the asset, but I want to explain to you how economies use value. And then markets. Markets are wonderful mechanisms. Forget about governments, I beg your pardon. Governments have a legitimate role in governance and in law and order. But when it comes to heritage, I think the market is increasingly coming on. And I will explain why and how. The cost of inaction, just look at this very quickly. When you have this quality standard, if you don't invest in your monument, the quality will decline, the performance will decline, and you need more and more and more and more as time goes by to bring it up to that level. The cost of inaction. Economic value. Now, economists are marginalists. They don't deal globally with spiritual values or heritage values. They say, what is the value of the investment to bring this monument from this particular state to that particular state? And so economic value is the value of the investment in bringing that from that dilapidated state into a decent state. And this is what really, this is one of the basic model, if you like. When we invest, let's say, 1 million in any monument, this happens to be Othello Tower in Famagusta. It could be anywhere. Restoration means investment in that monument, which improves its quality, but also its performance capacity to accommodate acceptable, sustainable uses. Now, if you do this and you stop there, and you stop worrying about revenues, you haven't achieved very much. You have achieved something, of course, but not very much. You've got to ensure that revenues will come out of that improved performance to pay for the maintenance so that, not to put it in our pockets as economists, but to ensure that there's continuous, sustainable service to the community. Our responsibility as economists, as experts, is to the final end is the delivery of service to the community. You see, when you've done this, then people come to visit the monuments, they spend money, and this means extra sales, revenue, extra jobs, extra income that my colleague alluded to earlier, property values and all that. But again, if you stop there, you say, of course, yes, economists are talking about jobs. But what you need to do is to make sure that from this increased value, something is siphoned back so that it will become sustainable and we reduce our dependency on the bureaucrats. We make cultural heritage a little bit more market-oriented. That's a project which I did with, of course, with many other colleagues, just as an example. It's in Split, the Diocletian Palace. The World Bank, luckily, they didn't listen to you lot. They said that together with the conservation vision, we need an economic strategy. Economic strategy meaning to justify that the value of the benefits will be higher than the cost. You know, I think this is understandable. Nobody's giving you money just like this, because you're beautiful. So it turned out through a technique we call willingness to pay, contingent valuation, which can be done, that the actual benefits were 5 times the cost, a benefit ratio of 5 to 1. Not bad. That's one example. Another example which I'm more intimately familiar with is the, in Porto Palermo in Albania, Ali Pasha Castle. When the archaeologists came round and they said, we need something like $500,000 capital cost to conserve it, and we estimate that it's going to be a running cost of $50,000 US dollars. And then I asked, what about the revenues? The public sector will give us the money. The benefits? Lots of benefits. I said, no. I got very worried. So I proposed that they should look to the nearest markets to see what the impacts will be, just to see what the market-based revenues and benefits will be. And with regard to the operational side, I insisted that not only to identify the cost centers, in other words, the things that will give rise to costs, but also, if you estimate the cost centers, you need to at least try and install revenue centers. Start thinking of how, who's whose devil's money will go there to cover your expenses so that you will fantasize. You have to put your mouth where your pocket is at some places. So the bottom line, by doing this, I think we saved the monument. I don't know what happened afterwards, but I think at least the perspective was put in place. This is basically how we interpret conservation investment in any particular area. We say that it's going to, if the existing situation is, let's say, how 500 people per annum pay 25 per day to visit a place and spend around the area, then if you spend 1 million in that site, surely you expect much more to visit. They will increase their expenditure, and therefore we expect 17.5. Now, this difference between 17.5 and 3.5, this means the local commercial business community may be able to make a contribution towards the restoration of other monuments in the same area, knowing that it is in their own economic interest and benefit. This is what we've done some time ago in Nicosia and in other places. It's called input-output analysis. I don't want to bore you with this. This is not why I have it there. But when you spend money on accommodation, 25 euros per day, you are not just, you are energizing, as the Americans say, demand and supply responses in other sectors like property, wages, labor costs, labor income, food, profits, repairs. Okay? The same with restaurants. You pay so much, but it trickles down. Therefore, you have what we call here, and this is the upshot of this particular slide. We talk about impacts, and impacts are direct, they are indirect, and they are induced. And together, if you put them together, they give you what we call a multiplier value. So when you spend one euro in an area of heritage area, it produces at least 2.1, at least, excluding construction expenditure. So this is to say, I mean, there are people who say it's not possible to measure the benefits. Rubbish. Of course you can, but it doesn't have to be laboratory accurate measurements. But this sets a framework around this so you can justify increased expenditure, as I promised earlier, increased investment in heritage. Fine, okay, I'm coming to the end now. But look here, people are saying, yes, benefits are things that make people feel good, they enjoy environment and the heritage side. But you have to have tools in order to turn benefits into revenues. And traditionally, governments and administrations, we are going for the hard options of introducing taxes as instruments for capturing, as we say, capturing benefits into cash. Things like sales tax, hotel occupancy charges, property fees, betterment charges, etc. This now is weakening, and we now come up with softer options which are more community-friendly. Business contributions. If a business community increases its sales because proximity to the monument and visitation, the business community may feel like giving a contribution. In the UK, which is the laboratory for betterment charges, they are abandoning that now, and they're talking about contribution, like the Crossrail in London, which will increase mobility. If you are within half a kilometer from the nearest station, then you pay a contribution on your planning permit. So we call them now contributions. Private investments, innovative finance for private investments. Private-public partnerships. When you fix a monument, then you invite reputable business establishments to set up the cafeteria or the restaurant, provided that the carrying capacity is acceptable. So really, we are looking for internally generated revenues instead of handouts, either from the international donor community or from the governments. Oh, very quickly, I know you see, usually conservation is regarded as a building outcome. I would like to focus more on the operational side of it and see what kinds of tools and skills are needed there. You mustn't think that I have all gone commercial. It's wrong. It's wrong. To justify and ensure quality, you need public governance, certainly, but you also need the capital, which will come from a business model. If you don't have a business model in the cultural heritage sector, I'm sorry, you are not sustainable. And this is the kind of the diagram that shows that if you have high level of control, you are not going to attract commercial capital. But if you go the other way around to attract capital, you are very low on your public sector patronage and control. So you've got to combine the two. Very quickly, the conclusions are very evident. The principles is that you have to identify off-site benefits outside the site itself, which is confined in revenues and benefits. Look at the markets widely, the retail market, the catering market, the property market, the transport market. If you do this through, there are research methodologies that allow you to be quantitative. Of course, to be quantitative, it means that you have to do some measurement, and there are tools to estimate value. Value is important, valuation, because valuation enables you to avoid the trap of undervaluing an investment and therefore becoming unfeasible, and you don't get the money. So you have to justify the investment in Split and in Albania and in Cyprus and elsewhere by demonstrating that the benefits are higher than the costs. This is how the economy contributes to quality, and not the quality becoming a driver or a factor of production. Finally, the conclusion is that you really need a more intensive interaction between the economy and heritage, because you are getting closer to sources of revenue. You may think that it's a vulgar thing to say, but if you don't have the revenues, then you are just fantasizing and you continue moaning that the sector is underfunded. Of course it's underfunded because you don't get your arguments right. And economics, I think, improves the communication of the heritage people to public policy officials and budget ministries and of other officials, so that you speak the same language. If you don't speak the same language and you talk to them about spiritual things and eternal things, and they will lose interest, I'm sure. So this is what is very important, is there is an area which is called the economics of quality. And finally, I would say that economists traditionally measure value in terms of quantity, consumption, investment, imports, exports, blah, blah, blah. Nowadays, there is heritage and environment where value comes from quality. But to ensure that quality, you need the investment to go into that. And that investment will have to come from other sectors, from transport, from housing, from health, into this sector by demonstrating that the benefits are high. Thank you very much indeed. I enjoyed that very much. Thank you.
Well, of course, I think you're not alone in having enjoyed it. I think we did as well. This was a really interesting insight. I'd now like to invite the speakers to come up to the panel here. There are only 6 places, so maybe Hannah, as you were only reading Anna Maria's contribution, okay. Okay, thank you. So we will now go there and take some questions. And can somebody take the mic to the roving mic? No, maybe. No. It's on now. Okay, good. Right, to move into this second section, the last speaker, Glavkos, started by saying that wasn't quite sure about the concept of the wider perspective, and then went on to provide us with a very good example of the wider perspective. My understanding of this issue of the wider perspective is the world in which we have to operate. And we had some very good examples of this during the presentations. We had the example of the real-world economics of the operations of cultural heritage, how to go about it in a way that the economy will understand. Because, and this is something I highlighted myself yesterday in a comment in the afternoon about communication. We need to learn to speak the language of the interlocutor and not to expect the interlocutor to understand the language of cultural heritage. And we have a very good example now from Glavkos about how to communicate in terms that the economists will understand. And this is really obligatory for us if we want to move forward. But we also saw many insights into issues like the legislative restrictions and opportunities. And we also had, from the very beginning, an interesting insight into the background of diversity, social cohesion, human rights, democracy. And the cohesion issue was picked up again also as one of the tangible results of the work that is done by the Met in Michaela's contribution. So we are seeing these different areas of the wider perspective, and I will use that simply because it's the title that was given to our panel. We see these coming together and knitting together, but I know there is one thing missing, and I know that that's the reason why Erminia asked me to moderate this panel, to remind also about changing the human diversity of changing demographics and the changing profile of our society, because that's how I come into the picture myself. So very, very briefly, I will just remind the panel and the audience about this issue, that we are talking about a humanity that is changing drastically. We are an aging population. And an aging population has changing needs compared to the conventional aspect that we all grew up with. We expected the world to be a difficult place to get around, but that wasn't really an issue because we were all able-bodied and we could cope with adapting to hostile environments. Now, the fact of the matter is that a large and increasing percentage of our population has great difficulty adapting to hostile environments. Many of those environments are only hostile because of superficial design, because we didn't think about it, because we didn't need to think about it. But where we are going, we need to be more inclusive. We need to think about human diversity, and especially the aging population and the population of people with disabilities, whose numbers are increasing. And by the way, without wishing to go too much into the tourism area, the big perspective, I had the honor to chair a conference of the United Nations World Tourism Organization a few years ago in San Marino, and the quotation of the figure of the potential of accessible tourism, just in Europe, is 800 billion euros per annum. And I always ask, are we really sure that each one of us in our country can afford to say, I don't want my share of that? Because that is the share that we're saying no to if we refuse to consider the variation in humanity and the needs to adapt to human diversity in society. So, without further ado now, I will open the floor to discussion, to questions from you, because that's my bit now. You can ask me questions as well, but really I prefer that you ask questions to the speakers, who made some very, very interesting contributions. I've done my bit, that's my responsibility. Now, let me see hands in the air, and who's going to break the ice? Yes, Hanna. Would you wait just a moment while the roving mic comes down to you? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will start with a question for Mr. Konstantinos. You already know that I'm only an architect, so I don't even speak your language, so to speak. But my question is there any language for a market which is defined by people interested primarily, if not exclusively, in sudden profit? Do you have a business model for such owners that they could accept? Thank you.
Hannah, thank you very much. Very perceptive question. It gives me the chance to elaborate, because I had this very nasty moderator saying, Glafkos, don't talk, because he knows that sometimes I talk too much, and Irini knows me very well. A very good question. Now, let me see. I never used the word profit once. Profit is a commercial concept, which, of course, is very important because it lubricates the engine of business. But I speak of benefits. Benefits are wider, have to do with how people enjoy, and that enjoyment can be translated like you enjoy apples and you go to the market and you express your preference. You express your social demand for apples by paying €2 or €1. I remember somebody saying that €1, you know, the price of that. Anyway, what I'm saying is that profit is something that needs to be kept under control. I'm not suggesting that a very important castle should be turned into McDonald's. That's why I think there is a very, very important challenge in our sector to make sure that we keep the right balance between business vision and public governance. And if you cannot do it as public sector, I'm sorry, you have failed. You've got to get that balance right. And it's not difficult. It means having the stature and the stomach to stand up to organize the commercial interest and make sure that they don't carry the day. It's not mission impossible. And I think it's not very helpful being so isolated from commercial interest. You've got to talk to these people so that you will understand better their motivation. You put your message across. You define your own concerns and say, my concern is to preserve this. It's a public good. It's not something, it's a premise, commercial real estate premises. So really, I think the crux of the matter is to be able, as conservation experts, as conservation architects, just to make sure that your message and your values are correctly understood, and that profit does not drive your work. But there is, I'm sure, there is a perennial, a constant concern to keep the balance right. Yes, if I haven't addressed fully, you can come back. Hannah. Yep.
Questions? Hannah broke the ice, but I don't see many other icebreakers in the room. Yes. The mic is on its way. I have some reserved questions just in case you don't break the ice. Don't worry.
Okay. So I'm Lena Takila from Finland, from the Finnish Museums Association. Thank you very much for these interesting presentations today again. And I was very impressed by the economistic talk today, because I think that's important as well. And my question is especially to our last expert, Glafkos, and maybe also to Michaela. Have you had some research done on the results of your projects? I mean, in the economic value, how much have you had profit from the projects? I mean, because I'm referring to a Finnish rather new study which tells us that for example, the Finnish museums increase the regional economy by over €30 per visitor. So do you have this kind of researches done?
I have to admit we don't have such a research or a statistic. How we measure this profit is by having few people depending on social welfare, more children going to school, more locals working in the community, so having a job or their own business in the community. I don't know, we measure it also by happiness and pride of the community being a part of that special community. Of course, we also started to think when we have implemented the bigger restoration, revitalization projects about an income, because of course, investing more than €1.5 million in a restoration project should generate some profit. But as a non-profit organization, it's, I don't know, maybe difficult to keep this balance because we really are not profit-oriented, but we need to have some profit to support other projects and also the sustainability of the monument. What we have done in this particular case in Almaviii, because this was the big restoration project we had, is that we entrusted and we have a partnership with a local association. So this association, formed by local people, they are the one who manage under our guidance and also supervision this monument, this historic monument, and they are the one who have a profit. So they are cook for visitors, so they have an income by providing food. They also make demonstration how homemade bread is made in a traditional oven or pastries, or they show how baskets are woven, and this is how, so they are the one who have the direct profit. Our profit is that the monument is maintained, because they are every day in the monument, they take care of it, they can see if something is broken, so this is our profit.
Very briefly, thank you again. Don't misunderstand me that I insist that every single part of any wider program should be profitable. No, this cannot be done. There are projects which are NFP, non-for-profit, because of the nature of the activity, because of the inherent nature of the monument. There are monuments which cannot withstand physical pressure, or it's contradictory to the meaning of that monument to have commercial activity. But if you want to really maintain it and ensure its quality, because this is the theme of the conference, then you need to have, we call it cross-subsidization. You get the money from another source which can generate revenues, not profit, revenues, to cover for the aspects of the project, of the program, that cannot withstand commercial pressure. I mean, there are examples at home in Cyprus. We've done many projects which we did not anticipate any revenues at all. And the result was not disastrous, but rather disappointing. So I think that it is true that not all projects should be for profit, I agree, but I think you must have the acumen to watch out for it. Yes, thank you.
I think I'd like to ask Barry whether you'd like to intervene on
That's
this.
what I wanted to do. So I would like to extend the question also for Mr. Barry Gamble.
First of all, I'm still the consultant to the Cornwall World Heritage Site that I mentioned. It received a lot of funding because it was
just want to add something to the question, because you're actually touching something that I wanted to ask you. Where does the money come from? Off again. Okay. We saw and admired the project, and I don't know if the audience, like me, was asking, where did the core money come from, the core funding? Because I think that helps us get the bigger picture, the wider perspective of how it all puts together. So I'll leave you to answer this one, and then we'll pass the floor on next to you as well, because I've already had the request to answer from further along as well. So sorry if I get your pronunciation wrong, Sherban. It's okay. That's okay. Okay, good. Then I'm happy. Over to you.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I remain the consultant to the World Heritage Site. Whilst the very often, certainly where I'm concerned, the primary motivation is conservation of the heritage, I fully agree in this day and age that the money has to come from somewhere, and economic viability, sustainability, community benefits and so on all have to come into play. It's interesting, in my time, I started advising the Council in 1999. The World Heritage Site bid, which was financed by the Council and the European Union, the bid was hosted in Environment and Heritage. That was the division of our Council where the bid was hosted. On inscription, the small team, 4 full-time staff, is hosted in the Department for Economy. That was a strategic move. I'll explain a bit about that in a moment. Cornwall was, at the time, what was determined as an Objective 1 priority investment region for Europe. I think the qualification was something like the average earnings had to be less than 75% of the national average. But anyway, we're qualified for European support. The money came from the local authorities. We had before I detail that, politicians initially were not supportive of going for this World Heritage Site status. They felt the opportunities were too restrictive for development. However, it was something absolutely the community wanted, and the community had wanted for some time. There's a very strong identity and pride in Cornwall that is felt to be separate from England. Cornish is a European acknowledged minority language, yes, this project was as much about identity as the economy for the Cornish people. I was involved throughout that time, as I mentioned, in this approach, this participative approach with the community. I was involved throughout, and there were skeptics, and my job was to talk with, not to persuade the skeptics, but to understand them and outline and make aware what the potential benefits could be. So to go back to the questions of where did the money come from, when the council agreed to pursue this, we said that we would, the initial concept was for a single World Heritage Site. We then decided and agreed strategically with a range of funders. The council was the core funder. Europe was a significant supporter. We're very fortunate in the UK to have a national lottery fund, which was also a supporter. Many different key stakeholders that had either the funds or the ability to endorse what we were doing. We got them together right at the outset. They were all involved in contributing to an economic baseline study, which we still measure annually all our performance against. So we do see for every pound spent what we get in return. So the money came from a range of funders. The stakeholders themselves already were property owners. I'll give you an obvious instance. In the National Trust holds some of our very important World Heritage properties in Cornwall. They already had a very well-resourced conservation budget, again, all balanced with revenue and so on, and very strictly controlled. But these were key stakeholders that we brought into our partnership. The World Heritage Site itself, hosted by Cornwall Council, doesn't really manage the properties. I mentioned 83% or whatever it is in private ownership, trusts and so on, including the National Trust. The local authority has some of the property, but it doesn't really manage the property. That's done by the stakeholders of the partnership, who are already engaging in cost and revenue exercises and have been for some time. The World Heritage Site office itself has a coordination role. This is a serial property, and many serial properties fail because they are not properly coordinated. So the function of coordination is key with this office hosted by the council. And that council has the ability, through this strategic partnership, including the funders, to draw in funds and prioritise them where they are needed most. I'm involved in that activity. From a conservation point of view, there will always be an overriding conservation objective where the money's needed most, but then there are all these other aspects when I mentioned the intangible and making this relevant to the community, making this relevant to an underprivileged sector of the community as well, which we still have in Cornwall. So the money comes from a range of sources. We always look across. I think one of the messages coming from the EU yesterday morning was use the various streams in an integrated and an intelligent way. We started doing that right from the outset. And when I gave the presentation in Brussels after 10 years, I think even some of the officers in Brussels were quite surprised how we'd used the system intelligently. So a range of resources, but we don't use the resources lightly. We have to justify all our investments. We have to evaluate all our interventions. And I would say, and I go back to why I'm a strong advocate of the World Heritage process and all the toolkits that brings, is that it does drive the quality to a high quality, and not just in the physical interventions, in every aspect of how we deal with the projects and the people involved. Outputs come from the project. I look at outside the box, and it's outcomes from the project intervention that I'm also concerned with. And outcomes will outlast the outputs. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can add some good news from a wider perspective. If we look at the actual world of construction outside heritage domain we are interested now, we can notice that the actual concept related to investment is the cost on the life cycle of the building, which is really important. I think it may be related to the benefit on the life cycle of the building, which we are talking about in terms of economy. And I was thinking that if, I may joke, the modern architect was a natural-born killer of the built environment, if you like, the future architect will be a natural-born renovator. Because in the construction industry, because of sustainability, pressure, because of not using new materials and using as much as possible the things which exist. The training of people, even of clients and economists and business plan makers and so on, in order to maintain and to reuse things which are reusable, is increasing, is augmenting. So this is training for the concept of conservation, and I think the whole world is preparing itself for a better position, to receive in a better position heritage.
I told you during my presentation that we have invested more than 10 million euros, And although I had it on my papers, I didn't mention that these money are private and public sources. Public sources are open calls of proposal where we are in competition with a lot of organizations, and the private sources are small donations from private persons or other foundations, organizations who support our work. And an exception is that we have also a company. I'm not doing any publicity, but I will mention them. It's the Accor Orbis hotels. They are supporting this reforestation program we are implementing here in Romania. They have this program, Plant for the Planet, Planet 21. And by not washing the towels every day for tourists, money are saved. And half of these savings are given to several organizations around the world to plant trees. And in Romania, Mihai Eminescu Trust is a partner for this Accor Orbis hotels. And thanks to their involvement, we have managed to plant so many trees and work with so many communities. And the program will continue until 2021. And I have to say, what we wish for cultural heritage is to have a similar program called Heritage Responsibility, because I think everyone is responsible for, and it was also yesterday mentioned that we have a shared responsibility, and I think maybe we can move also in this direction to communicate better with companies, let specialists to do that, and then to know what we are saying to them, because there is a lot of money in this private sector which could be resource for our projects. And also I think this kind of project offer us flexibility. They are not like the EU funding programs, which have very tight deadlines. They have a more flexible approach, and they think or evaluate the success of the project from the results. We are also quantitative, also qualitative. So this is what I wish for all of us.
It's always nice to know that there's lots of money out there, isn't it? It's really reassuring. It's a great idea. We just have to learn. Maybe Michaela will give us a seminar sometime to teach us how to go and get it.
Have to learn it.
Stefan.
Yes, thank you. Now that I heard Michael, I realized that we have done a common mistake in our sector of cultural heritage. We have invited here representatives of governments, of public institutions, academia, NGOs, but no business. So I think this is something we need to learn. It's very good that we are reminded this, and hopefully we will be smart enough next time to do it and start reaching out towards business. But it was something else that I wanted to add as well. As long as we talk of this wider perspective, I think the nature conservation sector has a lot of teachings for us as well. And I'm thinking especially of the ecosystem services approach that is somehow quantifying the benefits, multiple benefits that nature brings to our lives, also in financial terms. And I was wondering if any of you is aware of something similar, a system that would be similar to ecosystem services that would be applied to cultural heritage. Because of course we've heard about economic ways of interpreting cultural heritage action, but I think ecosystem services model is more complex. It involves also the benefits to our lives and also well-being and all that, but also in money terms, it quantifies things. And I was wondering if there is anything similar in our sector of cultural heritage, or if we can simply apply and interconnect nature conservation with cultural heritage. Sorry for being too long.
Well, I will try to answer your question, but I need to make a couple short comments before. The normal stumbling block that we see is when we talk to cultural heritage people and they confuse the profit from benefits. Because in social economy, the creation of the gross value added doesn't go to any capitalist. It goes to the whole of society. And it's a very weird concept, you know, because if you build in the modern way, you are using more money for building materials and less money for workers. When you go to the heritage business, we are the other way around. And that brings me to the answer to your question. The ecosystem services model is fine. The problem is to define what cultural heritage is in this model. So therefore, I would advise you just to forget about the ecosystem thing and go for the new catchword, which is the circular economy. And it's interesting to note that even in the EU Commission, the cultural heritage has become part, or is intended to become part of the circular economy. And what do we mean with that? Well, we mean provocatively a bit recirculation of places of worship, transforming them into something else. But we also mean, and basically it's the reuse of building materials, it's the prolongation of the life cycle of a building to save resources, etc. And that is a way to go. But there is no benefit coming out at the end for other than society in general. Because the problem is, just to finish with that, if I have a site, a property, and there's a house on the property, and let's say, for the sake of the argument, this house is protected. And along comes an investor, and he says, oh shit, you know, I can build 10 stories here. I can make a heap of money for myself. So I buy the house, and I tear it down, and I don't care about what the government fines me. You know, maybe a couple of €1,000, it's a drop in the ocean. Anyway, so I build my 10-story, I bribe the, whoever I need to bribe, I get the building permission, and in the end, I can put the money in my pocket. But social benefits, I repeat, do not go to any single individual. It goes to society in general. So we wrote an article about the economic figures I showed for Norway, and our Director General wanted to fix the article we had written for him, and he wrote at the end, this shows that investing in cultural heritage is a good thing to do. But you cannot say that. You can say that from a societal perspective, but from an individual person, it's not necessarily a good investment. So one of our advisors picked up the courage and went to the Director General and said, I don't think we should give investment advice in this article, because he had actually totally misunderstood. So we managed to get that out, but that shows how difficult this thing is. When we are talking to politicians and economists, they profit, the first word that comes up, okay?
It's a new area of investigation, and because there are various notions concerning profits, costs, investments, benefits, impacts, and this particular sector we're working in is relatively, I would say it without, it's relatively ignorant of economics. And very often, the economy is confronted as a source of costs. How much will it cost me to fix that wall? Oh, what a nuisance. Where do I find the money? This is a very casual approach to doing your business. Now, in cultural heritage, when you decide to restore something, immediately it's obvious that you feel that you're doing something good. Now, what we mean by good, it's something that we don't want to be casual about, because if you're casual and you don't call it a benefit, and if you don't really characterize it as an important component in your project design, then the donor community, the banking community, the patronage community will not look at you twice. They will say, you know, these people are doing something wonderful, but I have a road to build, I have a school to build. So you have to really, it's a competitive environment. And the reason why I kept characterizing the conservation activity as an investment, it is an investment, social investment. When I was a student, we used to call it social overhead capital, social capital, to support other activities. Now, if you don't, if you're not serious about this, and then you don't get the money to do it. And if you don't get the money to do it, dilapidation sets in, degradation sets in, and what is much worse is that there is this moaning within the industry that, the governments don't understand us and the bankers are nasty and they're only looking at profits. Profit is it's an accounting concept which doesn't tell me very much. It's to do on your tax returns. But benefit is very important. Finally, I would say this. It's a very multivariate, multi-level activity, heritage conservation. So the reason why one chooses to highlight one particular element, it doesn't mean that he's ignoring the rest of the factors that have got to be, you've got to get them right. The architecture, the engineering, the governance, including the economy. So when you are really highlighting a focus on the economy, please don't misunderstand that we are partial in our thinking and we don't respect equally all the other factors that have to gel together, to converge together to produce a final outcome. But what I would say is that it's no longer useful to say that heritage and history are drivers in the local economy. This is not very good. You have to look at what the economy can do for heritage by justifying increased budgets and increased investment in heritage. This is my job. Thank you.
Thank you, Vavkas. I see one more question. We are actually already running over time, so let's keep it short and a short answer as well. Thank you.
I just have some comments. Maybe I will do then only one comment, then we can privately discuss afterwards. What I have gotten from absolutely all the speakers is that heritage, the most important skill that we need as heritage professionals is maybe the language. Language and communication. So we need, from one hand, to be able to discuss with the economists to get our budgets, also with the community, because it has to be community driven, with the architects whose ego many times is much bigger, and I am an architect, so I feel I am excused to say so. But this also drives me to the point that Pete has suggested, and that was the change demography. And I would say that it's not only a matter of accessibility, but it's also a change in the substance of demography. So we have many villages that are abandoned, so there is actually no community, or since the cultural heritage assets, they are actually real estate, in other words, if we use another language, and this changes hands. So we might have owners who have absolutely no respect about the heritage values, so you need to address them in another language, in another way. The final product would be, it has to have benefit for everybody, and we must never ever forget this. And public policy is the one who should put all this together, and we have many good examples in Cyprus with putting everything together. This is our marketing, I would say, which is another form of language. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to put that to the panel because we're running late, but what I am going to do is thank you for doing my summing up for me, because you actually reiterated quite a few of the words that I was going to use. Stefan, 30 seconds.
I just wanted to tell you that we can prolong the session a little bit, because the other sessions are running late.
Oh,
So
that's fine. In that case, I will open this up to the
exactly.
to the,
That's
to the
why
rest
I
of the
was
panel.
saying that I think there are many questions in the room. So
I'm
let's
very
use
happy
20 more minutes
So before
for
I
discussion.
open it up to the panel, though, can I get maybe one more question before, and then I'll open it to the panel? Yes. Yeah, because I have a request for the floor here.
Hi, Anushka from Croatia. Only to add, maybe first of all presentations were very inspirational and very good, and thank you for that. I want to add only that maybe we need to think about development of small-scale projects for small communities. Maybe it would help in future, because if we give that opportunity to small community to act and to be creative and innovative and to interpret their culture heritage, maybe we can have a new impact and new solutions in this field. And I also, this idea can connect with a platform which was held in Dublin recently, and there were mentioned also that these small projects would maybe help. Small scale projects. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just want to comment on the previous intervention on language, adding that I think, in my opinion, of course, it's not the most important conclusion to keep the language. I will keep the idea of holistic approach. It's more than language. Language is just one of the things I will retain from this discussion. Secondly, we mentioned a couple of times mobility and migration and such things, which are certainly affecting identity, both at the origin and at destination of the migrants. So it's a really interesting phenomenon to be taken into account. And the third intervention I want to make, it's about, again, I'm going out of the heritage field to the, let's say, construction industry, construction field in general, and I'm referring to the Romanian situation, when, of course, like in other cases, for each feasibility study for investment, you have also to make a cost-benefit analysis. And if you look at Romanian investments, all cost analysis studies for whatever investment you talk about are perfect, ideal, are perfectly justifying the investment. I mean it. So because it was already politically approved, or it's going to be, only the figure matters. And it's no feedback on that. And I think it's something to be pointed here.
I think it's worth noting that the words we use talk about cost-benefit analysis, not cost-profit analysis, just raising that semantic point that we've heard about. Now, I know others want to take the floor on this. Yes, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, in sequence.
I was really struck by the concern here, which has been voiced. Benefits for all. I think this is the important thing. Very often, because we don't have enough time, what we do, we measure the value of benefit, and we forget the distributional impact. Who gets the benefits? If, for example, there are large benefits, larger than the cost, but all the benefits go to the rich, and the poor get nothing, then it's a project to be looked at it again. And this is very important, because when you have not so ethical governments, I'm sorry to try to use a very, this can happen, And particularly transport economies, they say, oh, we have so much benefits in terms of time saving and also in terms of reduction of accidents. But if it's on the London to Bristol, as opposed to Manchester to Liverpool, different socioeconomic profiles. To cut a long story short, unfortunately, in small economies, like Cyprus, like Croatia, like Albania, the benefits may be large. And the largest benefit is in terms of jobs created. Now, labor income. Now, if the economy is very small, it means that the benefits leak out to other countries in terms of imports. When you spend 50 euros buying a meal in a Saranda or in a Girogaster, then it doesn't mean that it is local income, because most of the potatoes, most of the cucumbers, most of the fish, meat is imported. So the distributional thing is very important. So benefits for all, I think economists are equipped to do this, and I think we don't always get it right, of course, but the distributional thing is very important.
You said about the small-scale projects. That's why in my presentation I said that it is important to make this progressive investment, because communities are not always prepared. Some of them are. That's why also what we are doing with the whole village project is adapt every time to the local communities, because like we are individuals, we are different. Sometimes we understand one thing and the same word, and we understand different things. So I want to tell also about the history of these villages we are working with. So they were inhabited by the Saxons, who after, also before the revolution in '89, they left. They left to Germany, they left this heritage, because here in this area we have mostly this Saxon villages, like we call it, and a new community inhabited all these buildings. And that's why when I started, I said we try to build this emotional connection. Before, the Saxons, they were the ones who have built all these buildings. They had that connection. It meant something to them. This culture was lost when they left. Very few communities still have a Saxon community in the village. So working with them, involving with them, and not only as beneficiaries, but as actors, is how we try to make this connection. Of course, in these communities we have a lot of vulnerable groups. Financial situation is not good, also the level of education is not very high, and I have to admit that the economic the benefit was the one who got along with our motivation to build this emotional connection. Because without seeing a direct benefit of this cultural heritage, the connection wouldn't have been created, or it took more time than it took now. And about the benefits for all, what we are trying to do with our tourism is to use the potatoes from our garden, to use the honey. Also, the guest houses, these traditional guest houses, which are set up in these old houses without any standard comfort, without television, without hairdryer or bed, I don't know, 2 meters per 1 meter, or I don't know what standards. And tourists come, and if the local who administrates the house doesn't have eggs because the hens didn't make their eggs, they don't serve these eggs at breakfast. So they will have only the products they have in their in the cellar, or some preserves. So this is also one of the standards we are trying to have in all these guest houses, and that's why it makes them different from other kind of guest houses who function here in the area. Is there
Thank you. I'm aware about the reasons why we all prefer to talk about benefits instead of profit, of course. My problem is that the other side, I mean the owner, the investor speaks about profits.
Yes.
So if your advice is for me to learn to speak their language, you should talk me to speak in terms of profit and not of benefits. I know. But you won't be the only one.
Yes, yes.
And now for Mrs. Türk, I know that Mihai Minescu Trust has been active in Romania only since 2000, if I remember well. So it's not even one generation. But I'm really curious, and because you opened this topic, I won't wait for the next 10 years, because one generation is around 30 years old, and I will ask you this question now, although maybe it's premature. Do you already have any feedback about that emotional connection you expect? Do you have any community you have been active in and which now stands on its own feet completely? Because my fear is that what you are building up, which isn't wrong, is actually an economical bond between the new community and the Saxon heritage, which is the right thing to do because people are profit-based and profit-orientated. But my fear is, but we will probably see only in the future, that once you will leave those communities, any bond will disappear. So my question is, do you already have maybe any feedback in this respect?
Great. You first, and then yes. Shall I? Very briefly, okay. Very briefly, I'm very good with timing now. No, my answer is don't. I'm not asking you to learn accounting. No, but one humble advice, which works, is that when you embark on any project, whether it's a single building or a block, a whole area, try to ask the question: who is going to pay the cost? Who is going to pay the cost? And if it's a public good, and because heritage is a public good, history is a public good, then we must make sure that the public sector has got an appropriate economic policy to back up your decisions. But if you just technically you are producing a blueprint and you say this is how it should be and stop there, without ensuring who is going to get the short end of the stick, who is going to pay for it. If it's going to be the innocent, unsuspecting individual who is being deprived of developer rights, then you've got to set it right. I'm sure Irene will tell you all about the transfer of development rights we are attempting to establish in Cyprus, so that the owner will not get the full impact of the cost. But I think usually the people who are expert in technical conservation, they don't ask this question of who is going to pay the piper, so to speak, who is going to pay the cost. No, okay, no. Then I congratulate you. Then no, I congratulate you then. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to make this into the last round of comments now, because we've been given grace of extra time, but I think we ought to close by 12 o'clock, because there will be another plenary session in this room in due course after the coffee break. So I think you all need to stretch your legs and have a coffee before that one takes place. So Michaela, can you also round off? And maybe if you want to come back afterwards, okay, then. No, it's okay. Okay, fine. Thank you. Then Michaela, and then I'll just go along here for the rest, and I'll wind up afterwards.
Problems. So Viskri is one of the villages I was mentioning that it is threatened now by over-tourism. Viskri has a population of about 400 inhabitants, and they have now a year, about a year, I mean from April to October, because during wintertime every guest house is closed, they have more than 40,000 visitors, which is too much for a village of 400 inhabitants. So what the work is different now in Viskri. We think about how to stop the cars driving through the village, how we can I don't know, redirect the tourists to other villages where tourism is not so developed. So we couldn't say, so from economical point of view, Viskri is now, okay, they started in 2000 with 4 families who had 5 guest houses. Now there are 37 families and there are about 120 beds. So they started with about 20, 25 beds and now there are 120 beds. And almost all community inhabitants have a direct or indirect benefit of tourism. Some sell vegetables for the ladies who cook. There are 2 restaurants now in Viskri, which we couldn't imagine in 2000 when rural tourism was not really attractive. In the year 2000, nobody thought about having a vacation for 1 week in an old house, in an old bed with old furniture. Nobody thought about it. But in the meantime, this has changed. So the behavior and our, I don't know, needs of the new generation is to return somehow in the past and experience how the grandmother used to live. Because in most of the countries, this lifestyle cannot be found anymore. It is. You can find it probably also in rural areas in Italy and in Greece and in other countries. But this was an opportunity for us to, I don't know, bring this economic income for families, because they are, most of them in these villages where we are working at are at the end of the road. From that village, you don't have a road to drive further. And we created these opportunities, and we feel also responsible for still supporting and guiding them. So I think we cannot take our hands. It is a desire, I don't know, but I cannot say the time frame. We can say, okay, now you are on your own and do it by yourself. We won't do any promotion anymore. We won't bring any tourism. We won't mention you in our presentation. Probably it won't be the case. And about the emotional connection, it was also in our thoughts if it is or not right to connect this emotional connection to the economic income. Maybe not, maybe yes, it depends. This is the way we thought at the beginning. Of course, I think also if you ask the people about what is your connection to the church, they would say, oh, it's beautiful and I like it. They won't say, I'm attached to it and I love it. Probably. We didn't make any questionnaire in the community to find out these things. But I think this connection is at this stage at subconscious level. It's and I think this is also very important to start, I don't know, somewhere way behind to come probably only in 2 generations we will really see a result of this emotional connection.
Well, permit me to correct you. We did, when we cooperated with the MIAM and ESCO Trust in 2005, we did a survey in some of the villages in La Slea municipality. And the connection to the built heritage was already very strong. But what surprised us was the unwillingness to work together. We said, well, you can paint this wall. You know, we have money to buy you the paint, you paint it. Nobody wanted to paint the wall, but never mind. So if you go back, look at the report from that project, you will see something. Okay. No, I wanted to finish by looking at the wider perspective by actually going back in time. How do I say it diplomatically? In a normally functioning society, every owner of a house or a building has an obligation to maintain this building. When the authorities decide to protect certain buildings, they are infringing on the private rights of that proprietor. In addition, we are also generating more costs for the owner, because when the repairs or whatever have to be done, they have to be done in a manner which we all think is a bit more costly. It costs more manpower. So the policy in Norway is that we cover the additional cost for the owners. Yeah? So if the owner needs €1 million, just to pick a figure, the normal maintenance cost would be around 700. So we finance the remaining 30%, which we sincerely believed are caused by our protection action. And I think we should go back to this initial model of thinking also in the future. Thank you.
Just on that last comment, I'll just give you, I'm just thinking on my feet here, if I come away from Cornwall, another World Heritage Site that I've been involved with, that I wrote a nomination for, was for the government of Japan, who I've worked for maybe it's 15 years now, I can't remember how long. But we had a situation where I wanted to bring into the World Heritage property some historic harbour, port infrastructure, shipbuilding facilities. The owner was Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, a global corporation, emerged from the Zaibatsu of the 19th century and still going strong today. Board of shareholders have lunch with the chairman, and the question to me is, why should we invest? And I think that's a very important question. Why should we invest? And the money we've had in Cornwall, we've had to justify very strongly why we should invest. We're not seeking profit. We are seeking benefits. We may, in certain cases, seek a neutral position. We are, however, avoiding liabilities. Coming back to the point just made, or the example just given in Norway, in Japan, this global corporation, in fact, two global corporations signed up to our project. One was Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, the other one was Nippon Steel and Sumitomo Metals, which is the third biggest steel producer in the world. They had property that we wanted to preserve now. It's in active operation, but we wanted to be forward-looking, designate this property in active operation as World Heritage, but it mustn't cost the shareholders. It must not negatively impact on the shareholders. So what we did, they already have a maintenance budget. They agreed to sustain that maintenance budget. And we had to then seek how we were going to fund the deficit for the standard, the quality standard of conservation that we wanted to get this site to, from here to here. We know their engineers, their people were the best people to do these jobs, and they were very quick to come up with the cost. And just this is the parallel for the case in Norway. The government of Japan stepped in, created a tax break for the company, and the equivalent tax break for that company on a yearly basis had to be applied to conservation. So going back to Cornwall, we had a brand strategy. We developed the brand strategy ourselves. We had a strapline, which was our mining culture shaped your world. We didn't pay 50,000 euros to a consultant for that. 6 of us with a stack of post-it notes in a bar one afternoon came up with that. one of our elements of our brand was to be entrepreneurial and creative. So I think the reasons to invest, you need to be creative, but you also need the data backing your argument to be persuasive. Thank you.
So the question is, if the heritage sector is equipped for the future, so for the wider perspective which future obviously brings, and who are the champions or what are the models to use for this future? I will not answer to this question because time's out, but I think we all answer somehow with bits and pieces. And as I heard in the room, coming back to the language issue, I don't think neither we should continue speaking the language of heritage to the others, and neither that the others should, or we should learn to speak their language. I really think that's a new language which needs to be produced, which would take advantage of the digital era, of big data, of the possibilities we have to monitor and survey and to control from information point of view what's happening. That's only an impression. Thank you.
I did say this was going to be the final roundup, but I said it after I'd taken the word away from Glavkos and given it to Michaela, so it's only fair that he should also have a last word.
Look, I saved it at the end because I'll give you an example where we hit the limits of the market and we rely on the conventional tools of governments. The walled city of Nicosia, it's a very small area which has the highest concentration of heritage monuments. Irene, am I right? Yes. The highest, numerous churches and a mosque and various layers of history. It attracts naturally tourism, visitation. Now, out of every euro spent there, very little, in fact, next to nothing, remains in that area. Why? It's a small area and it doesn't have a production base. So all the income generated by tourism leaks out. So this is the limit of the market approach. Therefore, this is why the Nicosia municipality and the Department of Town Planning, they are utilizing European Union funds just as a third way, so to speak, just to justify European funds in order to regenerate a very valuable area with many fundamentally valuable heritage monuments. So when the market doesn't work, and when there is a market failure, although I would choose first the market, but if the market doesn't go, this is what Keynes said, you can take the horse to the well and the horse will not drink. Then it's justified to rely on conventional methods, governmental instruments and interventions, with the support, of course, of the European Commission, the structural funds. And this is happening. It's the only way of doing it. The market cannot do it. Tourism, we go beyond tourism. And therefore, we have there's a large menu of choices on our list. So under certain circumstances, you've got to be choosy to see which instruments are applicable and useful to you. And one example is the walled city of Nicosia. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to round off then, a couple of closing words. From my perspective as the moderator, the interesting thing that the experiment we've tried to conduct here today has been to take the cultural heritage community, those of you sitting around here, and to throw open the windows, to open the doors, and show you the light of the real world outside, and to see in which directions we're going to be dialoguing with all these different actors. And as we've been hearing and understanding, they are on multiple dimensions, they are speaking multiple academic and non-academic languages, and obviously we can't all here learn to speak all of these other languages. But I think it's an interesting realization that every community needs to learn to dialogue with other communities, finding some form of middle ground in communication terms, and maybe even making the effort to go more towards the communication terms used by the other community when that other community is of particular significance to the work that we do. I've been picking up between yesterday and today a couple of words that are used and bandied around a lot in the cultural heritage community, and we don't always necessarily identify in the same way with these terms. And yesterday I talked about participatory models and inclusion. It's common for me to take exception to the way that people understand the term design, because that's the area that I work in, and nearly every person working in the area of design has a different understanding of what it means. So I always analyze and make my semantic analysis, make my clarification before I start talking about how I want to use design. Because if I'm using it but you understand something else, then we're like ships passing in the night and we don't understand each other. I don't preach that we should all become economists and use the language of economists, but I think that we do need to go part of the way in that direction so that the business community understands what drives us, and that we don't just expect the business community to understand us because we're so good and so wonderful and so altruistic, and cultural heritage is a good thing with a capital G and a capital T, you know, like in 1066 and all that, where everything was a good thing or a bad thing. One that is added to the list now is the tendency to focus more on the terminology of benefits rather than profits. And I think this is a useful lesson to be taken away from here as well. It may seem small and semantic again, but it's these little differences that make the importance in when we talk with people who come from different backgrounds and different mindsets. And because I've gathered this urge and this need and this interest, I'm going to do something probably unconventional for the moderator, which is to suggest workshops. It's all very well listening to these interesting presentations, but I know that, like me, all of you would really like to get sleeves rolled up and get into this and understand how it functions, not just with a couple of questions, but be able to get them into a corner and really pick their brains for a day or 2 days with a hands-on workshop. And I can see at least the areas of economics, how the cultural heritage interacts with the business community, the world of economics, the returns that you were explaining so well, Glavkos. And also, how do we interact with funding? We all talk about funding, and then every one of us has a different concept about it. European funding, national funding, private business funding. How do we go about this? And local cohesion. The example that Michaela gave us is surely material for an interactive workshop. Many of us, I think, would like to do a field trip, not just a couple of hours, but see on the ground how this works. And I'm sure that there are other countries that would have proposals and material to contribute to workshops of this kind. And I think something really interesting could come out of this. Not just written reports, but new experience and new capacities, the know-how to move ahead and take the agenda of cultural heritage into the wider perspective, which was our objective this morning. Thank you. And of course, thank you to the speakers, who were the ones who gave all the input, and thank you to the technicians, and thank you, above all, to the audience, because without the audience being here, there wouldn't have been much point in us doing this. Thank you.